Welcome back. You're still watching World Inside. I'm Tian Wei. Now we turn to China's foreign investment law, which was approved in the year 2019 and enters into force on January the 1st, 2020. The new law follows China's direction of further opening up and economic reform. The foreign investment law is designed to give foreign businesses broader market access, protect their intellectual property, prohibit forced technology transfer, and also guarantee equal treatment for foreign and domestic companies. Years in the making, China's foreign investment law exemplifies the government's commitment to facilitate foreign companies doing business in China and enhance the kinds of market competition that benefits Chinese consumers. China's Supreme People's Court, or SPC, last Friday issued a judicial interpretation applicable to the foreign investment law, aiming to better protect the legitimate rights and interests of foreign investors in the country.
Step inside any leading automobile, textile, or other large company in China, and you are likely to find an automation platform made by German company Lens. Entering China in 1997, they say they are very concerned about the stability, fairness, and openness of policies.
As foreign investors, we want to make sure there are laws and regulations for foreign companies to follow and to protect their rights on a legal basis.
The foreign investment law takes effect on January 1st. It addresses some of the core concerns of foreign companies operating in China, including complaints about forced technology transfers and lack of intellectual property protection. As a key supplier of drive and automation solutions, Lens relocated its Asian Research and Development Center to Shanghai in 2019.
IP protection is one of the biggest worries among foreign firms in China. They are afraid that their technologies may be stolen or copied. The new law will protect it on a legal level. It is very detailed and comprehensive. I think it will reduce foreign firms' worries to some degree and boost their confidence and hopes for doing business here.
The new law places great emphasis on equal national treatment of foreign investment, putting foreign investors on a more level playing field with domestic investors and giving them equal protection.
Also on the market access barrier, we have seen in the past year that the China authorities, they try to lower it, and a big job was done. But on the other hand, there are many indirect barriers when companies arrive doing business on the territory. We hope that it will help to boost the equal treatment between Chinese and European companies.
Foreign investors say ensuring the consistency of the new law's enforcement on different levels is as important as passing the law itself.
For more on the foreign investment law, we are joined in Washington by Bruce Fein, former Associate Deputy Attorney General and General Counsel of the Federal Communications Commission under President Reagan. In Hong Kong, we are joined by Edward Xie, who is the Chairman and CEO of Gaofeng Advisory Company. In our Beijing studio, Liu Baocheng is still with us, the Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Big deal, I guess, Professor Liu, this new law.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, people often attribute to Chinese, attractiveness for global investment in terms of the cheaper labor and the concessions of the land, government attitude, etc. I think the key is really the Chinese legal construction that is really there to pave the right way and bring transparency and predictability.
It sounds so abstract to me, yes. Professor. So what's new about this law that's likely to really make the foreign investors more engaging with China?
Well, more specifically, one is that the guaranteed of equal level playing field with all type of Chinese entities, be it SOEs or the private firms.
Okay, that's
the other
one.
is really the pre-establishment national treatment, so that they can register company as any other Chinese company do.
All right.
And then also negative list, which is really the key for them to identify where are those areas they can step in, and also facilitation of the establishment, and also the right type of protection for their properties,
Quite a long
be it
list.
tangible and intangible.
Quite a long list,
Yes.
Mr. Feng. It seems that the foreign investors could be quite happy about all of these new fascinating possibilities.
Well, on the face, I wouldn't have any quarrel. But implementation is still a question mark. The issue is whether or not these requirements against any expropriation, the requirements of equal treatment of foreign investors with the domestic entities, with a fair and even-handed administration of the laws, will be executed.
Mr. Xie, would you like to respond to that? What's your take?
Yeah, my take is that this is a process that the Chinese government has been undertaking since they started the reform and opening 40 years ago. Over the last several decades, China actually has been opening up its markets gradually, sector by sector. It's not perfect, but it's a very consistent direction. I think what we're now seeing is actually a further step forward in that direction, that China has recognized that reform and opening is the only way for China to continue to become better, to become stronger, and to embrace foreign companies into the China market is a very important step.
Professor Liu?
Yeah, let me respond to the question by some specifics as I observe. This law was made in March of last year, and during the legislation process, multi-stakeholder engagement took place for a number of rounds, so that all foreign companies, be it law firms, be it local governments, have full opportunity to reflect their opinion, and this is really unusual as compared to other legislation. And the other is MOFCOM has conducted thorough training to local government officials and even business leaders and Chamber of Commerce, etc., during the past 9 months. And more importantly, I think the most recently on 26th, Chinese State Council published the implementation procedures to as how to implement this law in a very effective way. And in addition, that the Chinese Judicial Department has also provided a judicial review and further interpretation as some type of case law that can really address such an issue. So I think this is very serious, and we need to have confidence in this law for its implementation.
Yeah, Mr. Feng, I don't know whether you know the Chinese system very well, but obviously what Professor Liu to me is trying to say, it seems to him that there has been a process about local, about specific government departments dealing with trade and economics and cooperation, and also at the State Council, which is the national level, the national government, and at the same time the judicial branch of Chinese government have been dealing with this issue since the proposal was put into effect earlier. So Mr. Feng, probably that could answer some of your questions. On the other hand, Mr. Feng, may I ask you about the fact that the environment for trade is not very pleasant these days. We have a war, quote unquote, trade war going on between China and the United States, which has been protracted into the year 2020. Meanwhile, we also see some so-called, what many believe as protectionist measures coming from the U.S. toward the other economies, in China, to China, particularly about Chinese tech firms and others. Do you think one party's actions is likely to poison the overall environment of improvement on both sides? Mr. Feng.
But I don't think the responses are just unilateral here. The United States was responding, maybe in an ill-advised way, to what was thought to be a Chinese unfairness in having a much closed market there and subsidizing state-owned enterprises that were entering the United States market. China is notorious not for protecting intellectual property as it is in the West.
I could understand why people are concerned about whether or not this law could be appropriately implemented. But my understanding, having worked and still working with quite a large number of American companies operating in China, as well as my understanding on the intentions of the Chinese government, first of all, I think the Chinese government is really very earnest in its desire to continue to open up, because they have seen the dividend of the reform and opening up since the 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And China has been a major beneficiary of globalization and multilateralism. And therefore, as you know, in the last year or so, as President Trump was drumming up the U.S.-China trade war, the Chinese side has actually been reinforcing or underscoring the importance of maintaining globalization, maintaining multilateralization, and the opposition against utilization. This move by the Chinese government to continue to open up and to allow more degrees of freedom for foreign companies, including American companies that operate in the China market, is earnest. And I think this is really the opportunity for many American companies to truly tap into the incredible potential of the China market. This is now the opportunity, and the law is going to be helping it.
Yeah, Mr. Xie, if I could follow up, earlier Mr. Fein certainly had been put into question what he considers as important, which is the IPR protection. And he, if I could use a quote of him, is China is, quote, not well known for protecting of international property, end of quote. Now, of course, there's a lot of whether known or facts known. Those are very different things, as we know, in a very much a world of social media and direct different opinions. So, Mr. Xie, what do you make of that, and what does this piece of legislation also mean for China's commitment and China's urging its own companies and departments to be committed to intellectual property protection?
Well, certainly, as China evolved from a planned economy 40 years ago, the whole context of legislation, policy, rule of law, and so on was so drastically different than the rest of the world, in particular the countries that are of capitalism, and is their own sort of rule of law and so on. Over time, China was trying to evolve, and of course, along the way, things are not perfect. There are a lot of imperfections along the way, but along the way, the Chinese government, in particular central government I'm talking about, is trying to really improve on the situation. Times have changed. Nobody should look at what happened 40 years ago or even 20 years ago and say this is now still the case as of today, because the evolution of China is towards a more knowledge-based society, which is being raised based on more innovation and disruptions in business. Many of these disruptions and innovations are governed or driven by Chinese companies themselves. And the leading Chinese companies would need to have the IPR protection as much as any other companies from any other countries. And therefore, one would expect that the protection, the IPR protection environment in China will have to improve over time.
So, Professor Liu, I want to come back to you about that point. Mr. Fei made a great point, which is, what about other factors besides the economic and trade issues that's going to have an overall impact on the decision being made? Even after this new law put into effect, even with implementations, if one side is doing something that the other side take as unfriendly or unlawful, will things spiral out of control, even with this, what China consider as a great law?
Well, despite of the uncertainty or unpredictability on the U.S. side, I I do see that there is a certain limit that they can really push the envelope to. And
what do you mean by they?
Yeah,
who are you referring to?
I mean, because the global economy, particularly for the biggest economies, they are so much intertwined, and now, after almost 2 years of, the disputes and also the punishment on both sides, I think now there is a time for people to return to rationality, and hawkish people has been trying with number of efforts to really link, many other issues with the trade and economic relations. I think now, at least the White House has been trying to refrain from the vicious or the toxic the containment over such sort of issues. So that is why we are able to achieve the Phase 1 deal, and hopefully through the successful implementation, and we are going to engage more and restore the confidence between the two economies.
As you may know, Mr. Liu, may I just, Washington is much more complicated than just one White House. There are different branches of the U.S. government. There's also different momentum developing there among different interest groups in the U.S. Regarding their relationship with China. So, Professor Liu, can this law be beautifully implemented free from all of these uncertainties, Professor Liu? Unfortunately, I have to use that word again.
Yeah, I do not think one single law can solve all the problem and address all the complaints. Things can really pop up. So, but the as the professor of legal training, I do see that this is really a high level of seriousness.
Mr. Xie, Professor Liu, what do you think if you were providing advice to the American companies or other global companies, looking at this piece of legislation, looking at that and say, great, it's wonderful. But on the other hand, what about the uncertainties? What is that fine balance? Mr. Liu.
I think one is really to the Chinese government and Chinese lawmakers, is that just because there are hawkish groups in the U.S. side, and that also there are populist groups within China, to wait for a negative response to such a law. So Chinese government and lawmakers should be very firm to really implement this law. Otherwise, it's going to serve their agenda. That can be very toxic. And also to the U.S. community, I think, look at the fact that, how many Chinese, the companies have been working with U.S. firms within China and globally on a very successful basis. And look at the fact that China is the second largest recipient of global FDI. None of those decision makers behind those, foreign investment into China are really unwise enough to make stumbles. So therefore, look at the broad picture and work with Chinese community, work with the Chinese government to continually improve its investment and trade environment, and that's the right type of approach.
Right. Mr. Xie, final words also from you.
Yeah, in order to be successful in the China market, American companies need to make themselves a real insider in the business and political community in China. That means that the American companies have to work closer with the key stakeholders within the Chinese business and political circles, working closer with the government at the central level, at the local level, as well as their local Chinese partners, business partners as well. The American companies need to do a much better job in this dimension.
Mr. Feng.
So I do think that as we speak today, the environment is not overwhelmingly constructive to lower the barriers. For example, with all the law that you've described with new foreign investment, the President of the United States under U.S. law could bar any American company from investing in China under the International Economic Emergencies Powers Act.
Yeah.
And he's done that in some respects with regard to Huawei, where you can't sell them certain technologies or things of that sort. So the law could be nullified overnight by the stroke of a pen, which means that the diplomatic relations are going to be highly important to see how effective this law will be in act.
Edward Xie, Liu Baocheng, Bruce Feng. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Happy New Year to all of you. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Inside CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Inside team, Thanks for watching and tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. And Happy New Year to you, every one of you. Thank you.